Wow, it is such a joy. It's such a joy to have you join us today for this portion of our parenting conversation. Look, if you're coming back a second, third, fourth time, we appreciate your time and you're sharing the video and engaging and learning. That's a wonderful thing. And if this is your first time and you're wondering what these parenting conversations are about, they are practical conversations where we equip one another and encourage one another as parents on this journey. And today, my wife and I want to dive into obedience, the issue of obedience, compliance, obedience, first time obedience, how to train obedience. Is it even possible, Hadassah, for children to obey? Is it even in them? Or we are just crazy to think that they can actually obey? Or is it just the way of life that you hustle, you give an instruction, then you give again, then you threaten a bit, then you encourage a bit, you bribe a bit. It is, and this issue, Hadassah, actually is a stress factor for many parents. Telling a child to do this, and then they behave as if they've either had you, or in that moment they feign voluntary deafness, or they develop a certain level of immobility. What you say versus what they hear in accordance to what they choose to do. We'll get some help today, won't we?
Hopefully we can be able to get some help. Welcome once again. Today we're going to be discussing the way of obedience. Obedience has a way. Just like many things have a way in which they are done, even obedience has a way in which it's taught. Obedience has a way in which it looks like, and there's some characteristics of obedience.
Hadassah, what does obedience look like?
Before we get into what obedience looks like, there's two things. One, I would like to remind us of our obedience teaching is going to be totally drawn out of the scriptures. So in Deuteronomy chapter 6, I want to read there because this is going to be major. Obedience doesn't just like fall out of nowhere. It has to have a background. And I am a strong believer in foundation. So Deuteronomy chapter 6 from verse 4 says this. Should I go there? Yes. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk with them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. It's important for us to note that obedience starts with the parent. And it's also before the parent, we need to notice that obedience is required by God. He expects us to come in such a fellowship that walks in obedience, especially us as parents. And when we do that, he's charging us by saying, these things I have taught you, let them be in your heart. If obedience is not in the parent's heart, it's going to be very hard for the parent to transfer obedience to the child.
So that's the place of obedience, if you think about a place that obedience resides, is inside the heart.
So the heart is a very huge focal point when it comes to us talking about obedience. We must look at the heart. It's not something that we do on the outward. It must spring from the inside. We must love it. We must be sold out to it. We must know its advantages. We must know its consequences. We must know, why does God place such a huge emphasis on us as parents teaching obedience?
That is so interesting, because if the residence of obedience is the heart, the goal of our parenting then really is not so much the external activity,
Absolutely.
in as much as it is the heart.
The heart.
One of the things I've had that has been life-changing for me is the person who has the heart will influence it. And the heart is, if you think about that internal place, that place of special things, that place of, you can define the heart whatever you want to, but it is that place where if somebody or something is inside there, they will move it. There is the place of desires. The heart is a place of wills. The heart is a place of emotions, thoughts, and so on. And so it is the center, the core of anyone's being. And so obedience needs to reside inside there. Otherwise, you will, if you don't have obedience, if you don't have this understanding in your mind that it is the heart that you're going for, then you will miss the point.
Yes.
You will then begin to deal with issues such as compliance, like what the revenue authority does. Actually, that's a good one to discuss. That obedience is not compliance, because in compliance you are supposed to do, but then we don't want to.
Yes.
And therefore, the government sets up a revenue system that forces us to. We don't have an option, but we will. Then they enforce. Now, for many of us, if we had the option not to pay taxes, we would not. But we pay them because we must be compliant. However, obedience is resident in the heart. We don't have to, but then we want to obey.
So in other words, we must come to the level where we want to, and eventually obedience does turn into submission, which we're not here to talk about, but we're talking about obedience.
The way
today.
of obedience.
The way of obedience. So what is obedience, and how does obedience look like? Obedience, for me, as far as my experience with our little ones, obedience is a cultivated positive response to given instructions.
Say that again. Obedience is a cultivated positive response to
a given
instruction. So where there is obedience, there must be an instruction. When there is no instruction, you cannot expect obedience. It's very simple.
Absolutely.
So it's, for example, let me give you an instruction. Can you wave your hand? Have you obeyed?
Yes.
Yes, because I gave a very clear instruction and you responded.
Absolutely. Once upon a time, we have 3 children. One of our last one, I think at that point he was 3 years old. Our home has a part where it has a
Like
raised,
a storied balcony.
Yes, balcony. You know how high they are, and it didn't have any guards on it. So one of those days, these little feet found the stairs, which were out of bounds. But curiosity resides in every heart, in every little child's heart, and foolishness too. So he decided that day to go up the stairs. He went up the stairs. The little feet went up to the balcony. So to the extreme end of the balcony, the mother, who is me, I was on the phone with a very deep spiritual conversation I was having on the phone. Imagine that. And in that moment, when I turn around during that conversation, my eyes land on my 3-year-old up on the balcony with no guard whatsoever, not even one brick guard. I'm standing right there. I'm looking at this young man, and I'm thinking, oh my God, we're about to make a mlambo. So I told the person on the phone, you hold on. I put the phone down. And in that moment, I called out to our son and I said, Jethro, you stand right where you are and don't even move. And the young man did exactly that. He stood right there. I remember running like a fly from where I was.
There's a fly zone, right?
I don't know. But it was so fast. I went up the stairs. I found him right in that place and I picked him up. Thankfully, knowledge is very powerful. That was not a moment to be angry and to be screaming. So I picked out the little young man. I took him down into our house and I sat down with him and I said, Jethro, do you know what you've just done? Anyway, That's the story. But what is the point that I'm bringing across here? If this 3-year-old had not had the virtue of obedience inside his heart to hear his mother, that obedience saved him in that moment. Obedience. Why teach obedience? For safety reasons.
That's one of the reasons.
That's one of the reasons. And that obedience is cultivated. How do you tell a 3-year-old to stay right where they are and they stay right there? It's something you've been cultivating. That's why I said it's a cultivated response. You have to have been working with a child over and over again. How does obedience look like? Before we get into the practicals, obedience is immediately. When I say, Jethro, stand right where you are, he doesn't go,
It's not a suggestion for
No.
later or for you to consider.
yes.
It is for now.
Now, so obedience is immediately. Obedience is complete. What you have said exactly, the child must be able to do. Obedience is
Without challenge.
without challenge. You don't ask, why? Mommy, why? In that moment of asking, the young man could easily lose his life. So obedience actually majorly is for safety reasons.
And that's, it's much more than just safety
I'm
reasons.
saying that's one of the
One of the
reasons.
reasons
Yes.
is that in the times when life is at stake,
Yes.
you want to be sure that you don't have the luxury of time to negotiate back and forth. You want to make sure that when I give you an instruction, you will obey right away, just as I have said. Because sometimes it's a life issue. It is and I don't have the luxury to explain. You know, you've some of you have watched this movie. What's the name of Tekken? There's a Tekken series they've done in the past, and the father of the girl, she's been kidnapped and so on, and they have these split seconds for him to communicate. And he says to her, do A, B, C, D. Now, if you've not been cultivating and training obedience, in the moment when you require its fruit, your child will begin to say, what are you saying? Why? Bichi? And stuff like that. And in that moment, life can go. There is so much at stake. But the other reasons why we train and teach, you cultivate obedience because it's a behavior. You cultivate it and you work at it. Is because it's just a good thing. It's the right thing to do. Have you seen parents who it's embarrassing to see a parent give instructions to their children and their children behave like they've had nothing? It's dishonorable. It's disrespectful. Oh my goodness. There's a better way. Guys, there's a better way. And this is what we're talking about that you can teach. Some of the other things, Adasa, is
I think
that
also obedience does evoke blessings.
the blessings of obedience,
The
yes.
blessings of
yes,
obedience, which
yes.
they're as huge as from generation to generation. I mean, think about Abraham. When God gave him the try to go and sacrifice his son, God was very specific with his instructions. He said, rise early in the morning, go here, do this. And he did exactly that. And in doing that, he actually, the reason why we sing this song, Father Abraham had many sons. I am one of them. The blessings of obedience cut across. It's not just a daily, it's not just for the parent to be comfortable, but this is generations we are talking about. When we're training our children into obedience, there will be other critical life moments
exactly.
that need an obedient response that is going to serve the future of your child, his finances, his children, their children, and many other generations that are coming after us. So obedience does evoke blessings.
As we're going to jump into the way, some of the practicalities of obedience and some considerations to make, it's important to note at this point, Hadassah, that our children's heart, just like anybody, is like a warehouse. And within that warehouse is stuff that we keep depositing. One of those is this virtue, this training of obedience, because you just never know at what point a demand on it will be created.
Absolutely.
There's others like otherness and self-control, and there's a lot of things that go into that warehouse. And so the question is, what are we feeding into that warehouse of our children's heart so that it is not necessarily for now, but it's for later? That's how you end up with, even in the absence of the child, even in the absence of the parent or an adult, you will find that a child is capable of doing good.
Making the right choices.
Making the right choices. Why? Because some work has been done in the past. But let's talk about the way of obedience, Adasa.
Yeah, way of obedience. Yes.
Instruction.
Instruction.
As simple as instruction.
I think one thing that really is very sound, it's still in the scripture that we read, I think that we need to look at our everyday daily life in our homes as full of opportunities for us to be able to teach obedience. There's so many things that can happen in our home that actually God expects those things to be happening in our homes. Somehow he expects them to be happening. One, he said, talk to them when you sit in your house. In other words, he's expecting us as parents to have a house where we have our children, and we need to be talking to them.
Talking about what? So much.
Exactly. Talking about so much. And some of it is in the previous scripture, but really it's talking about life. Talking about the way of life.
One of the
way to do life.
One of the things of talk is, you see, when you give an instruction, for example,
You're talking.
You're talking. But also, don't give an instruction as a parent that you do not expect your child to obey or to respond to. No, don't do that. You and don't have that expectation of them. But then number two also is, sometimes we expect certain behavior
that we have not
that
taught.
we've not taught. So genuinely, the child does not know that this is how I need to respond in this situation, or this is what is expected of him, because that's not been shared with me. So in this talking series, talking at home
in the house,
there's a multitude of things that we can talk about,
Yes.
especially or including the things that must be done. So when I do this is what I expect to be done.
This is how I expect you
Exactly,
to respond.
yes.
And I think that right now what's happening is that most of us parents feel more comfortable if someone else talked to our child. It's becoming acceptable, the singer will, the auntie will, whoever will. But the scripture is saying that it is to us parents to actually make the time to sit down in our houses and talk to our children. It helps with relationship building. It helps with trust, and obedience and trust go together, and love.
Yes.
All of those, they are sisters, they go together. It also says when you walk by the way. So there will be times when, as parents, we need to take walks with our children. Literally take walks.
Do walks also account for, can they also be drives with our children?
I think so.
Okay.
I think they would.
But it involves,
it's not accidental.
But it involves a certain movement where it's intentional. We are together,
Yes.
and we are going someplace.
Yes.
Going to places, or choosing to go to places, but we are in motion.
Yes.
Taking walks.
Or even walking at home if you have a place where you can be able to walk. But the idea, though, is also having individual relationships with your children, not to buckle them up, 6 of them, and you're walking with them all the time. That's not, sometimes you can do that, but you need to have an individual each child needs to know that they have full access to you without any competition. Every child in the home needs to have that, so when you talk, the other one, when you lie down and when you rise up. So there is an expectation that we're sleeping in the same space with our children. When we go to put them down. Not in the same bed, but not in the same bed, absolutely. The same house. And they can be such intimate moments when we go to put our children to sleep. The day is ending, they're winding, up with their day. And they have so much that is running through their mind. Sometimes they're going to ask you very intimate questions like, what do you think about the texture of my hair? Or what do you think about the other dress, or whatever? Children have this thing where they have these intimate conversations, and as parents, we miss them sometimes. Sometimes those can be shower times, they can be lying down, putting them down to bed, and they have these conversations with you that are simply saying, I'm letting you into my heart. Remember, we talked about the heart.
Yes.
Yes, so the child sometimes will have moments when they open their heart to you, and you need to make sure that you're tuned to it. That's why the scripture is telling us when we lie down, when we rise up. And then it says, bind them as a sign on your hand and write them. In our homes, we usually put up pictures of things that we like, our wedding pictures, our friendship pictures, frames of certain words, it's also very beautiful to hang up those scriptures that really inspire your family. The 10 Commandments, the way of love. Put up those things when children learn to read, even us as parents, they're such great reminders.
Yes.
They're such great directions to ourselves. And all this time, these interactions are availing us situations of parenting, of teaching obedience. When a child asks you, when you're putting them down to sleep, it's a very good time to even drive a lesson to them.
Yep.
When you're showering them, bring a lesson to them, perhaps about dressing, perhaps about how to treat the neighbor's child. Maybe there was a conflict during the day and you did not attend to it then. But when you're showering, you could easily tell your little one, when you make friends, this is how you talk to them. You don't raise your voice. This is how gentleness sounds like
and looks like.
And looks like. So all these moments are just opportunities for us to be able to teach obedience. And let me say this, all these 5 things we have shared, their one thing they have in common is that they're all outside conflicted times.
Yes.
We tend to come
to teach, to correct when temperatures let me tell you, even for you as an adult, when someone confronts you in the heat of the moment, at that point, that is not the greatest time to teach, to pass a lesson. We will learn best when we are in non-conflicted times. So learn that. Teach these things when there is no stresses. And how does that happen? Every day. It's important to note that, 2 key things in that lineup of walk, talk, sit down. There is expectations that God has of parents. Yes. One of them that is very key is that you're actually present in very normal ways, very present. So for those of us who are parents who are busy on the go, we have to be a lot more intentional about this, that we are present with our children. Because it is the most natural, which is the second point, that these teachings and this parenting and these principles we are passing on are best received during non-conflicted times. Even for you as an adult, if I were to, we sometimes make the mistake and say, I will teach you a lesson when guns are blazing. No. When guns are blazing, I will defend myself. I want you to know. Naturally, my instinct is to defend myself. Even husbands and wives. So if you're going to deal with an issue, please find a time that we are in the time of peace. Even if I come up with a resistance, it will not be as lethal as when you find me when I am guarded and so on and so forth. But as we come to a wrap up of this, Hadassah, obedience, you can actually achieve what we call first-time obedience with your children. And you can trust knowing that I will give an instruction and it will be obeyed. Now, we are also referring to younger children a lot because, we deal with foundations. You begin the journey as you go. But you see, this element of presence and teaching and training is eventually when the children are older, you become a trusted source. You become a better coach for your children, a better mentor. And you will find that your children will, even in their older years, they will come back because this is investment that you have done in the earlier years that guarantee a certain level of qualitative relationship when they are much older, and they also become parents, in that time.
Yes. So anyways, as we wrap up, just a few things that we could actually, remember. One, obedience is cultivated. It's not something that you achieve just one night. It's cultivated. It starts with a parent, and God does expect us to have it inside our heart. So if we don't really appreciate the advantages of obedience, it might be very hard for us as parents to actually realize how important it is to call our children to obedience. And we are saying that obedience can be achieved. We are saying your day at home, or even just one day, is full of many opportunities for us to be able to teach obedience to our children. When we walk with them, when we talk with them, when we lie down, when we write them everywhere in our house and they're able to see them in visible places, to remind them of what we're actually teaching. So obedience is something we go about step by step, and yes, it can be achieved. And maybe perhaps in our next video, we'll be able to go through the practicals. Like, where do I start from? How do I give the instruction? What if they don't obey the first time?
Yes.
What can I be able to do? And next time we'll be able to go through the practicals. Thank you so much.